Hello and welcome to another Capital Ideas. My name is Sandy Behan and our guest this week is Representative Ed Crocker. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I always appreciate being here.
Okay, you have sort of a dual role this morning. You are still the representative for District 45 in the Oklahoma
House of Representatives. That's right.
And you are currently running as a candidate in the 4th District for Congress.
That's right.
Okay, so you still got two roles to play.
And still get called upon to do the official role, and that is my job, and I'm always glad to do what I can.
Okay. Let's start first of all by talking about last spring in the state legislature and what was accomplished and what was not accomplished and your perspective now that you are leaving the House, and then we'll move into the election. I know the kids that are coming on have questions primarily about the campaign, so I'm going to leave them to their glory a little bit, so to speak. So last spring, what do you think was good about what went on there and what didn't get accomplished?
Well, there's still the issue of a real partisan atmosphere, an impasse between the governor and the legislature that is puzzling to me. The things that really do happen down there where progress is made is always done in a bipartisan way, and it's unfortunate that sometimes the sessions will kind of come down to the final end game where there's a lot of partisan posturing and all that kind of thing, and I find that to be unfortunate. A lot of the vetoes that of bills for like the Ethics Commission and the Attorney General's office, excuse me, these were bills that were originally passed with significant bipartisan majorities, and the governor, for his own reasons that I'll let him explain, decided to veto certain appropriation items that had been approved overwhelmingly. And when it went to the veto override, it went back down to strictly a party line vote, with a lot of the Republican members going back and changing their vote to support the governor's veto. I found that to be inexplicable because these bills are passed, again, by reaching out and creating bipartisan majorities, and it was troubling to see the way that it would get back to the party line votes.
The person who replaces you, when he goes to the legislature, what kinds of issues is he going to have to deal with in the coming session?
Well, you've got a new welfare reform bill that I think is a pretty good bill that came out of this in the 1996 session of Congress that Oklahoma is extremely well positioned for. It puts a lot of responsibilities for the administration of the welfare directly back upon states. Oklahoma is well positioned for that because over the last 6 years the state has taken dramatic steps to reduce welfare dependency and to reduce the level of AFDC enrollment that will, because of the way the formula is set up, cause Oklahoma to actually get a premium in terms of the monies that are available from the federal government coming back down for welfare. So that's certainly an issue that's going to have to be not troublesome, I don't think, but certainly complicated in how we pick up the reins of welfare administration. You have ongoing problems in corrections that are unbelievable. You have the inadequacy of prison bed space compared to the demand for prison bed space at the rate at which we incarcerate prisoners, and we've got some real challenges before us there in terms of expanding the publicly funded prison system as well as the privatized portion that is going to be growing in size and significance. The unfortunate reality is that those dollars are the same dollars that are competed for by education and other important functions, but certainly corrections is not unimportant in any way, but it's going to be a real crunch for the state legislature. Then you have the perennial problems of adequately funding public education from kindergarten, primary, secondary, and higher education, including the VOTEC system, so that we can keep our educational system going to the greatest extent possible, since that really is also one of the most fundamentally important things that state government can undertake.
Let's talk about the whole crime thing and the incarceration issue for just a moment. If I'm not mistaken, Senator Henry from Senate District 17, I think it is, was working on a committee that was revising the criminal code for the state, and that would change the sentencing procedures and all of that.
Called truth in sentencing.
Trying to get some
Right.
sense out of the whole process. Do you sense a problem or in the public's perception of this person made this mistake and he needs to go to prison to be punished for it versus the reality of who should be actually in prison?
Well, the truth in sentencing is something that's drawn, at least in the initial rounds, bipartisan support in terms of the general concept, both from Governor Keating as well as most all the legislative leadership. It's much more easy to talk about it, though, than to get it done. It's a very complicated feature, but truth in sentencing has to do with defining and prioritizing those crimes for which you absolutely want people to serve time, because for heinous violent crimes, for example, then requiring that they serve at least a minimum percentage of that time so that they don't get off early or just, you know, get a 10-year sentence and are out in 16 months or 2 years. Then that, because of the inadequacy of prison space and the expense of building new prison space or private, even if you have private prisons, it still costs the state money, so there's still costs involved. What you do is you deprioritize some crimes, the nonviolent crimes and the crimes that are not violent in nature at all, and then you find community sentencing programs, you find alternative methods of incarcerating or punishing, rather, those people involved in those crimes, thus freeing up space. So that the concept is to have more space for the people that you really want to have the space for, the violent criminals that need to be put away for a long, long time, if not forever. Getting agreement on the details of something that broad and comprehensive is very, very difficult, but it's one that the legislature has struggled with for a number of years now, and ultimately what will happen is if agreement can be reached, and it nearly has been a couple times in the past, that will allow the legislature to repeal the prison cap law that is so onerous to some people. The House voted, and I voted along with them, to repeal that prison cap law in 1995. The Senate didn't go along at that time because of the inability to reach agreement on truth in sentencing. So it is a complicated issue, but I anticipate that if the parties on both sides of the aisle keep their nose to the grindstone, that we can reach an agreement on that in hopefully next session.
If you look at the polling that's going on and the kinds of questions that are being asked of the voting public, they consistently say that crime is one of the primary problems in American society. You're a candidate for Congress. That means that your perspective now has to broaden out from just worrying about House District 45 and Oklahoma and Cleveland County to the state of Oklahoma and the United States as well. As the campaign has gone on so far, most of what's happened, at least from my perspective, is newspaper press releases from your side, press releases from the other side, television news stories from your side or about you, and television news stories about your opponent. But you've never really talked face to face. You've never had an opportunity to face-to-face debate the issues, discuss what's really important in this campaign. And I read this morning that wasn't going to happen. Why not? Why did your opponent choose not to participate in a debate with you?
I would refer you to him for the most appropriate answer to that question, but when we announced this campaign for Congress formally, we challenged my opponent, J.C. Watts, to debate any time, any day, on any issue. Obviously, debates are defined in a certain way. It requires that it be held at a neutral site with a neutral moderator upon pre-agreed rules of engagement, where both candidates are subjected to, well, in the case of the 4th District, where there's also a third candidate, a libertarian, that the press would have to have access to asking questions of the candidates. The candidates would have to have access to one another in terms of responding to their responses and then engaging each other in a direct debate. That's the kind of debate we want to have, a real debate. And we're very disappointed that, that Mr. Watts has decided, especially in light of the fact that C-SPAN was going to nationally televise a debate to be, between the two of us to be held on the OU campus sometime in October. It's a lack of, it's a loss of a great opportunity for the people in the 4th District to see the issues debated forthrightly and in a forum where they can then make an informed judgment. We think the people are entitled to that interchange between the candidates and hope that, that J.C. Watts will reconsider, and agree to debate his opponent face to face.
I know that I'm a bit of a junkie for this and not typical here, but as I flip through in C-SPAN, I've noticed they've had the Senate debates from Minnesota, they've had the governor's debates and the Senate debates from Massachusetts, and from some other states as well, and it's been interesting because there's a lot of commonality that you don't realize until you start listening to these things. And this was an opportunity, as you said, it was going to be nationally televised. It was an opportunity for Mr. Watts as well as for yourself,
Right.
and just for the state of Oklahoma, for people to get some perspective on what's going on.
And it's really unfortunate that for whatever reasons, and I don't think any of them would be good, and I won't speculate as to what the reasons are here, but we have our fears on that. But it's something that that I think I certainly, if I were the congressman, I would feel compelled to agree to debate, because I think the people are entitled to hear my case as well as my opponents, and then our reactions to one another. It's part of the democratic exercise, and again, I hope that he'll reconsider.
Now, there are now plans for something with a debate format other than this, but you have appeared together, have you not, in various places?
We have appeared actually together just 2 times, once in Blanchard and once in Waurika.
Okay, and are there scheduled events where you will be together between now and November?
Scheduled events, panels and forums that some people think of as debates, when in fact they're not, because they don't really provide the opportunity for direct interchange between 2 candidates, and it's possible that you have moderators that aren't exactly neutral in their orientation and whatnot. A debate is a closely and strictly defined term in terms of what it is. We don't mind the forums or the panels, and we eagerly look forward to those events as well, and are appreciative that the sponsors have agreed to put those on. But what we want is at least one debate in a public forum, preferably televised. Although to be a debate, it does not have to be televised, but I think televising just adds to the benefit to the public. A lot of people have asked, well, you know, this has been a pretty rough and tumble race, so what about the issues and whatnot? And of course, we've been trying, I think, on both sides to get our issues out there, but a lot of people have wanted to concentrate on the rough and tumble nature of the race, the horse race aspect to it. But a debate would put all that aside and allow all parties to concentrate on the positive reasons why each of the candidates are running, and let the people make up their minds. We think the people are entitled to it.
Very good. And we'll be back in just a moment with 2 students from Central Mid High School. Our student guests this week are Vanessa Hill and Kelsey Martin Farwell. And Vanessa, I believe you get to ask the candidate the first question.
Yes, why have you decided to run for Congress?
The real reason I'm running for Congress is because I think that the stakes in the 1996 election are very, very high. Since 1994, we've seen a Congress that got elected in 1994 go to great lengths to implement an agenda that I think doesn't honor the priorities and needs of the people in the 4th Congressional District of Oklahoma. I think that those decisions have been supported by our current congressman, and I feel that that we need to have an election 1996 to decide if we're going to continue on that road or make a change. I think the people have been, in our national and local and congressional elections, have been voting for change in 1992, again in 1994, and I believe that they'll be continuing to look for change in 1996. And I also want to run on some principles and some elements of my campaign strongly related to national defense, commitment to public education, to balancing the federal budget, and to trying to bridge the gap between environmental protection and free enterprise. There's this belief that you've got to have one and not the other. That somehow if you're committed to free enterprise, you can't be for protecting the environment, and if you're for protecting the environment, you can't be for free enterprise. And that's an unfortunate polarization that's occurred on that issue. And I think what we need is a congressman like myself who will get in there and try to put together some environmental policies that are based upon pollution prevention. Instead of fixing up an environmental problem after it happens, let's stop them from happening in the first place. And those are the real reasons that I'm running for Congress.
Did you serve on a, am I correct that you served on a legislative committee in Oklahoma that dealt with some of those kinds of issues?
For at least one term, I served on the environmental committee, Environment and Natural Resources Committee, the House of Representatives, and I've had some experience in that, and I've also passed some environmental pieces of legislation as a state representative, dealing with recycling and those types of things.
Right. I thought I remembered that. Kelsey?
How were you first introduced into politics?
How was I first introduced into politics? Well, this is a long time back, but my first recollection of it was in grammar school, and believe it or not, when Dwight Eisenhower was running against Adlai Stevenson in 1956, I paid a little bit of attention to that, a little bit of attention to a governor's race in 1958 in California, where I was living at the time. And in 1960, I was considered myself I was 12 years old and considered myself to be a very young Republican at the time, and did precinct work for the local Republican headquarters in my hometown in Southern California. That's how I first got introduced to it, and I've kind of liked it ever since, I guess.
Vanessa?
How is running for Congress different from running for the Oklahoma House of Representatives?
It's bigger, for one thing, but scale, bigness of scale doesn't necessarily mean better. It just means bigger. My state representative district, House District 45, is comprised of 13 precincts, all inside of one county. The congressional district I'm running in goes from Midwest City to Altus, and all points in between. It covers 10 full counties, part of an 11th county. It is 291 precincts in size, and the way in which you deal with people and campaign is much different in a race that large. In a smaller race for not necessarily less important, but just the smaller race of the House District 45, you're allowed much closer contact with voters on a face-to-face basis, on a one-to-one basis. In a larger race, you have to deal more through the media, and because it's just physically impossible to make contact with that significant a percentage of voters. While you try to do that, and you go to all the events and the forums and the county fairs and the things like that where you do traditional grassroots campaigning, you're forced to rely more on media to get your message out, and it's unfortunate, but true that that's the way campaigning is done in those types of contests.
Most of your press and the newspapers and everything haven't talked about your campaign issues, and so I just want to know what they are so we can just kind of decide if we're for you or against you.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I hope that I hope that you would talk to the press about that, because every time that we put out a press release, we talk about issues, and like I said earlier, the press sometimes concentrates on the horse race nature of a race and more or less disregards the issues in the race. We have got a sheaf of press releases and issues that we developed in the Crocker for Congress campaign at our headquarters that have not seen the light of day in any forum. Especially when you're running for the first time the way we are in our organization, you have to rely upon the press to express an interest in your issues. We make those issues available, but they're not always relied upon by the press in their coverage of the race. That's not our fault. I'm not even saying it's anybody's fault. I'm just saying it's the way this campaign has, and many campaigns of this nature, come down. But I think that's a legitimate interest, and that's why I've always tried to talk about the priority issues. What kind of Congress do we want to have? What are our priorities? How can we maintain a national defense, a commitment to public education, and a commitment to some spending programs that need to be maintained if we're insisting on giving away the store in huge tax cuts that can't be supported. The other side in my race has promised over $500 billion in tax cuts, promised to balance the budget in 7 years, and promised not to touch what's called entitlement programs. We think that that's a fantasy, and we think that it's a very important issue that needs to be debated. We put out a major piece on that. Press did not cover it. Okay, we think it's the most important issue in the race, and we can't get any coverage. So bear with us, and if you're interested, I'll give you my webpage address, and you can look at all our position papers and find that the Crocker campaign is talking extensively about the important issues that face Oklahoma in the 1996 election.
Where and in how are you receiving funding to run and support your campaign?
Percentage-wise, most of my funding is coming from within the state of Oklahoma. We appeal to individuals for support. Excuse me, and this is true for both myself and my opponent. We appeal to individuals for support, and we appeal to political action committees and our political parties for support, political parties from the local, state, and national level. Percentage-wise, like I say, most of my support from individuals is coming from within the state, whereas my opponent, when you look at itemized individual contributions, between 30 and 40% of his contributions come from outside of the state of Oklahoma. These are not illegal or unethical in any way. They're allowed by the law, but again, I think it's an issue, and again, I think it's something that the people are entitled to know, that only 3 to 5% of my contributions are coming from outside of the state of Oklahoma when you look at individual itemized contributions.
Have you been endorsed by any groups or major organizations?
I've been endorsed by several. I don't have a listing right here, but I've been endorsed by the Oklahoma Education Association. I've been endorsed by the Sierra Club. I've been endorsed by some labor organizations that have a great interest in the 1996 election, and I'm very, very proud that I've garnered several endorsements from organizations that represent average, everyday working Americans and working families that struggle to make ends meet in our economy.
Now, with those endorsements comes money, usually. That doesn't necessarily mean a lot of money, but some money.
It can mean endorsement with no money, it can mean endorsement with a little bit of money, and sometimes it can mean an endorsement with a maximum contribution, which, again, both campaigns in this race are availing themselves of to a significant degree, and we're happy to take the endorsements we have.
If Congress remains dominantly Republican after this election and they try and cut funding for school programs and activities and even different classes, how are you going to fight to keep our programs available?
I have, like I've said a couple times in this interview, I have staked this campaign on a strong commitment to public education. My opponent has busied himself over his term in promoting programs to promote vouchers and to promote the use of public funds to promote private education. I'm not for those things. I will stand up and advocate for one of the greatest things in our national American heritage, and that's a strong commitment and reliance on the benefits that come from public education. In no way am I opposed to private education. I absolutely am not. But people that have the ability to do that, I applaud them and have no problem at all. As a matter of fact, I think that the education in those environments is a super one. But the overall commitment in our country has got to be to public education, because that's how we're going to move the entire society forward. And I will stand up and be a strong advocate for that. And you didn't state it as an assumption, but the possibility that the Congress could remain Republican is certainly there. There's also a growing possibility that the next Congress that will be elected will be of a Democratic majority. And if I go in as a minority member or as a member of the majority party, my position will be the same, and I'll just be a strong advocate for that and do all I can to promote the legitimate use of public funds, to promote public education, not only in the 4th District and in Oklahoma, but across our country.
What have you gotten personally out of running for Congress?
Well, it's nothing that you really realize until you do it, but it's a great opportunity to participate in the thing you learned about over the years called the American Constitution and the American system of government. I mean, you reach a point, or I reached a point, where I was able to become a candidate for the Congress of the United States. It's been a great honor. It's been a great opportunity to define my own priorities and what it is that I want to see done. It's been a great opportunity to meet Oklahomans from all walks of life, and it's been an enriching experience, and I think an overall positive one.
If you win, excuse me, if you win this election, how would you try and change things in Congress?
Well, one thing that I zero in on, and I've been very critical of this last Congress about, is that they have mucked around with a lot of health care and retirement programs for federal employees and the military people and the veterans, and they want to take a look at possibly privatizing Social Security and whatnot. At least that's not what they say now, but that's what they've done in this last Congress, and I think they need to be held accountable for it. The one retirement program that they never got around to playing around with was the one for members of Congress, and I think it was a glaring oversight, to say the least. The health care and retirement benefits that go to members of Congress is so incredible as to defy description and cannot possibly be justified. And if there's ever been a retirement system that needs to be pared down and made more similar to what other Americans have to go through in terms of what they can set aside for retirement, it's the congressional pension system. It's one that I'm very much in favor of not only taking a look at, but doing something about and paring it back. So that's, if your question had to do what I do to change things in Congress itself, that would be at the top of my list.
Vanessa?
What is your reaction to the welfare bill recently signed by President Clinton, and what would you do to change it?
Well, you described that good. Well, it's was signed by President Clinton. It was also passed by this Republican Congress. It was a much more moderate version of what this Republican Congress proposed in 1995, and it was because of a strong position held by the President and the Congress that what you got in the final analysis was a welfare reform bill that could pretty much be supported by majorities of both parties. That's, after all, what our system is about, is bringing a majority view, a consensus view to these problems. It's a good deal for Oklahoma. In the last 6 years that I've been in the legislature, Oklahoma has dramatically reduced its dependence, its enrollment of AFDC clients. We've already reduced the welfare rolls in Oklahoma. 2 years ago, we voted to restrict benefits after a certain period of time, the way the Congress did just this last year. These are the directions we have to move in. I think we are challenged, and we are challenged as Americans, not just as Republicans or Democrats, to turn our system of welfare and the dependency it creates into a system of work that provides work and benefits. And if we're going to do that, then we, at the same time, become committed to dealing with the problems that face working families: daycare, job training, job retraining. We need to expand our commitment to things like the Head Start program. We need to look at welfare in its broadest possible form and change it from a dependency of welfare into the hope and opportunity of workfare, of returning people to productive roles in society as soon as possible.
Well, unfortunately, I'm getting the sign that we're running out of time.
I
And
just
wanna-
got one too.
Okay. And I want to thank you very much for coming this morning. Good luck in the
Thank
in
you
the
very much. I
candidacy.
appreciate being here.
Hopefully, we will get a debate and get to see it and hear it.
I hope so too.
And we'll be back next week with another Capital Ideas.